this week and for the last few weeks, and probably for the next few weeks as well, John is going through his all-time 11s from different clubs, dating all the way back to 1960. And tonight we're looking at Tottenham. And John, I guess Liverpool and Manchester United was a mix of the old glory years and the modern teams, with Tottenham probably a bit more actually around when this started off, because their last league title was all the way back in 1961.
Yeah, I'm going back to that time, actually, Nathan, when they were in a great team. Actually, going back to the old days, 1959, I'd maybe debut against Spurs. When they were coming on to the best, Danny Blanchflower and Dave Mackay just come down from Scotland. They didn't win the league that year, but they won the double the next year. They were one of the great teams with great players, Nathan. And as you said, they haven't won the league since, I think it's 1961, is that right?
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, when they've had this great team, but they've had great players along the way, of course.
Yeah,
but I think they were the first team of that century to win the double. Yeah,
it was something else back then. I think it was a real separation for greatness, and obviously it's become a little bit more common over the last while as the better teams tend to win the FA Cup as well. So let's get into it then. Your starting 11. I think you're going to go with a 4-3-3 formation. Who's your goalkeeper?
Goalkeeper is Pat Jennings.
All right, straightforward decision.
Pat was one of the great goalkeepers. Great ability and great control. Very calm individual. Funny enough, when he first came to Spurs, from Watford, I think, Nathan, and didn't do very well. He was left out of the team. There was a lad called Billy Brown, who had been the goalkeeper in the doubles winning team, and he was still there, and he got back into the team. So it took Pat a while to settle down, but once he got back in, at that, he was very young. He was absolutely brilliant. I think he was the best goalkeeper of that generation.
He spent 13 years at Tottenham, incredibly successful time, and maybe his reputation at Tottenham, because he ended up signing for Arsenal and the rivalry that's there, I don't know, was it tarnished somewhat, but he's such a legendary figure in this country as well. Was he an incredibly commanding goalkeeper?
Yes, and calm. He was always calm. He never got excited about anything. He made his saves. There was no big deal to him. His technique was brilliant, but a very calm goalkeeper. As I say, he was the best around my time. I was very lucky. I played twice with Pat. I played with the All Ireland team, and I played with the 3 versus the 6 when we were going into the European market at that particular time. And he's a very calm fella off the pitch as well, I think. But he carried that onto the pitch, and he just knew what he was doing. He had a great pair of hands, huge hands. He was a really top-class goalkeeper with a great temperament. You could trust him, really trust him, Nathan.
Yeah, the hands are the one thing that everybody talks about, like hands like shovels. Yeah.
But he was a great personality, I think, off the pitch. He always struck as a really easygoing lad, and he carried that onto the pitch. But did the job. I mean, his goalkeeping was brilliant, very agile. The likes of Shilton and Clemens were around in that day, and Gordon Banks. In my opinion, I played against all those guys. In my opinion, Pat was the best of them.
He was the first goalkeeper to win the PFA Player of the Year. Played over 1,000 times at the top level. Would there have been an acceptance around the late 60s, early 70s that he was the best goalkeeper around?
Oh, I think so. A lot of competition in those days, though. You had Shilton coming into it. You had Gordon Banks, who were great goalkeepers. Ray Clemens, terrific goalkeepers. But again, I think Pat was the best of them. That's all I can say about him, Nathan. These were all great goalkeepers at that time, but he was top class.
All right, so Pat Jennings is the goalkeeper in John Giles' all-time Tottenham 11. You're back 4 then. Let's start at right back. I'm
going to give it to Steve Perryman.
Okay.
Steve Perryman, I played against him a lot as a midfield player. He was a good midfield player, good character, good leader. Wasn't outstanding in the middle of the field, but he moved to right back, Nathan, later on. And I don't think he got into the England team, but at that time I thought he was the best right back around. He was a good warrior. He was a real Spurs man. He was captain them for a long time, and he always had a go. He was a good leader in what he did. He was a good player, Steve. But right back was definitely his best position. It was easier for him than playing in the midfield. So I put him in a right back.
Yeah, he 17 years at Spurs, made nearly 900 appearances, and obviously incredibly versatile. Played 20 minutes for England.
Did he? kiddie. I didn't even know he played for England. But as I say, he's a midfield player now. I had a lot of battles with him. He could get stuck in. Good player. He wasn't one of the best English midfield players at that time. But certainly when he went to right back, he might have got in. I don't know whether he got in at right back and in the England team or not. But I would have had him at that while he played at England. At Spurs at right back. I thought he was the best right back at that time.
Was he that modern type of right back where he'd be bobbing up and down the pitch, or was he just steady?
Oh, he could, yeah. Well, he'd move from midfield, so he'd obviously had good control and could use the ball well, Nathan. But you'll find with players that can play, the further back you move, the easier it is. And that's with him, because he played a long time in midfield before moving into the right back position. All
right, so Steve Perryman at right back. Who's your left back?
My left back is Chris Hughton.
Good Irish representation in all these teams, John.
Yeah, well, they were good players.
Yeah.
Nathan, Chris got on with the job. No fuss, nobody. You see him now as a manager. He never seems to get excited about anything. But he could really play, get the job done. No fuss about him. Get on the ball, use the ball, defend well, and he was an ideal type of, again, temperament for the game. He's a quiet lad, Chris. But a very, very intelligent lad, in my opinion, and certainly football intelligence he certainly had, and a good player, really good player.
Is that one of the big transformations in the game then in recent years, those full-back positions? Because I think almost all of the full-backs you've selected are like real steady characters, almost all of them almost unassuming type characters who just did their job week in, week out. Whereas now, I think Andy Robertson was in your Liverpool side, there's an expectation that they're almost one of the main creators on a team.
Well, that's happened. We have the wing backs now, Nathan. I'm not a great believer in the wing backs, to be honest. A designated wing back, because I think I think a full back, the first thing is to defend and go forward at the right time. I don't think you have to have a wing back. They get too far ahead of the ball, I don't think, but a wing back or a full back, in my opinion, defends at the right time, and then when it's time to come forward, they become a wing back anyway. So you don't need a designated one. And these lads in my day, whether it be Paul Reaney or Terry Cooper, came forward at the right time, but they were in defensive positions when they had to be in defensive positions, Nathan. So that's my belief. I'm sorry, I'd be old-fashioned, but I don't see where full-backs in my day attacked. Just attacked it probably as much as the wing backs today, but they were in better defensive positions. And Chris Hughton was one of those. But times have changed. That's the way it is. They have the wing backs, and that's it. I mean, some of them, Andy Robertson in particular, is a really good defender as well as getting forward. But he gets forward at the right time.
Hughton enjoyed a lot of success at Tottenham, won a couple of FA Cups, won a UEFA Cup in 1984. As a player then, defensively, was that his main strength? Was it his awareness? Was it his crossing? What part of his game really stood out?
Well, he was an all-round player. He defended well at the right time, Nathan, and came forward at the right time. He was in my day it was called a fullback. They were expected to do that.
Yeah.
There was a lot of attacking fullbacks in those days. Terry Cooper at Leeds, there was Ray Wilson, nearly all of them, Jimmy Armfield, but they weren't designated wing backs. They were fullbacks who came forward at the right time. And again, just before I started coming in, the fullbacks didn't get forward beyond the halfway line. They were big fellas, strong, could get stuck into the winger. And then the game changed. The likes of Tony Dunn, Ray Wilson, Chris Hughton all come into the game and got forward at the right time. But they had their defensive duties as well.
So Chris Hughton's your left back. Your two centre halves then?
My two centre halves, I'm going for Mike England, who played in my day. He played at Blackburn and then he was transferred to Spurs, and he was a Welsh international. Very good in the air, good on the ground. He was a very, very good player, Nathan. Mike England. Yeah,
I don't remember a lot about Mike England. So, as you say, I think he was there from 66 to 75. He had almost a decade at Tottenham. Yeah. Was he very much the main man at the back of that team?
He was.
Winning FA Cups and UEFA Cups?
That was 9 years. That was 9 years he was there. He was a big lad, good on the ground. Now, he's good. He was a top-class player, Mike England. Played for Wales for years as well, Nathan. Yeah, he was a top-class player.
So who's alongside Mike England?
I'm going for Leslie King.
Okay, so Ledley, because the one I was thinking was maybe someone like Gary Mabbutt, but Ledley King's an interesting one because in a way it feels like a talent that never fully flourished, who spent his entire career at Tottenham and just had so many injuries, where he could have been one of the great centre halves. He could have been on sort of a Rio Ferdinand type level if it wasn't for the injuries.
Yeah, he was such a game lad. But when he played, you know, and that's why I'm picking him, because he had a lot of injuries, but he was still a terrific player for Spurs. You know, he made, how many appearances did he make, Nathan?
I think for Tottenham he made 320 appearances in 13 years.
Yeah, well, that's not bad for a lad that had a lot of injuries. But when he played, you'd never think he had an injury. You know, he was so game and brave that you know, he never made an excuse of it. He'd just play when he could play, and he had a great attitude. But you'd have to have a great attitude to get as many injuries as he did, and play as many matches as he did. I thought when he did play, he was a terrific player.
Yeah, he was. He was a real lovely footballer to watch. Would they have complemented each other, Mike England and Ledley King?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. As long as the both can defend it, there's no harm with the two of them being able to use the ball, Nathan, at centre back, and he could do that. But I'd say Mike England would defend a little bit more than King.
So you're back for then Steve Perryman, Mike England, Ledley King and Chris Hughton. Let's get on to the midfield then, because this is generally where the controversy starts, John. You've gone with a three-man midfield. Who's the first of them? I'm
going for Danny Blanchflower.
Straightforward?
But Danny was a great leader, and he was a very, very good player. But I know he was very influential with the team that he captained that won the double and that. Because there was a story they played in, I think, the Cup Winners' Cup, and Bill Nicholson was the manager, and Bill was going on and talking about the opposition, how great they were, and that. And Danny said, well, hang on, Bill. He said, we have a few players that can play. So they went on to win it. So I know Danny was very influential in that team with those particular players, and he was a great leader and a terrific player himself, Nathan.
What sort of player was he?
He was an attacking, we would call him an attacking midfield player. Well, see, when those days you had wing halves, and again, they were expected to defend and attack, you know. And but Danny would be more known as a creative midfield player than a defensive midfield player. And he was good at it. He was really good at it. But he was very influential in that great team, Nathan.
Interesting, even, as you say, a creative midfielder, that their job was very much to create. He scored 15 goals in 337 appearances for Tottenham. For a player who played in that advanced role, would you have expected more goals from him? Would that surprise you that that's what he got?
He didn't play in an advanced role, because he defended when he had to defend it, but attacked. He got obviously very, very good on the ball. He wasn't a goal scorer midfield player that you get today when they're designated midfield players. A lot of the midfield players are expected to score goals. Like Martin Peters came later on. Martin Peters was hardly in the middle of the field. He started from the middle field, but he was a goal scorer. Where Danny was both. You know, he was up and down and creative and defended when he had to as well. But definitely a great leader in that team, Nathan.
And Footballer of the Year as well. That year that Tottenham won the league in '61, their last league title. He was the main man on that team. Yeah,
he was very influential, because I know with the manager, he had a good relationship with the manager at the time. And but I know that in big matches, and Danny was a terrific leader of the team.
Did you play against him much, or was he?
I made my debut against him.
So he played that day. You made your debut.
He made a comment to me afterwards. I don't know whether he was joking or not. He said, "You did much better than I did on my debut." I know he said, I didn't do as well. Whatever he said, anyway, I could have taken it either way. But I think he was being complimentary. I'm only kidding.
Well, when you finished and you've just made your debut, getting a compliment from Danny Blanchflower, I'd say was something to cherish.
We were beaten 5-1.
You didn't walk into the dressing room, goes lads.
I think he was trying to be nice to me.
Right. Give you a little pick up for the Irish lads. So Danny Blanchflower. Who else is in there?
I've gone for Glenn Hoddle.
Okay, there's obviously a lot of brilliantly creative Spurs midfielders over the last few years. Why is it Hoddle?
Yeah, he was that. I don't think Glenn Hoddle was a great player now, I think he was a terrific player over a long period of time for Spurs, and at the particular time he was in the Spurs team. They didn't have a great team, and he did particularly well for them in that particular time. What I played against Glenn Hoddle. What I found with him, he was a very gifted lad, Nathan, but he wasn't quick. So what happened to him over his career was that if he was having a good time with Spurs, and then people would pick him out and they would close mark him, he couldn't get rid of the marker. And then he'd have a poor time, and then they'd leave him alone, and then he'd have another good spell. Like he played 49 matches, I think, for England, and he was still promising at the end. Do you know what I mean? With the ability he had. But I think he was a terrific player for Spurs at that particular time. Very gifted lad. He scored spectacular goals. He could distribute the ball well. He was easy on the eye, Glenn Hoddle. You know, he's a very, very good player.
It's hard to think of a player of that era who divides opinion so much, because I would have grown up, everything I would have heard was that Glenn Hoddle was a genius. And then when you start to dig a little bit deeper, it is that, well, often on the big occasion, it went a little bit flat. Now, maybe a lot of that was because, as you say, with England, there's so much pressure on English players that if they don't deliver in the international jersey, it tarnishes everything else. But like, if you're talking about he struggled when he was man-marked, like that's quite a flaw for a player of his talent, that he never was able to maybe to teach himself how to deal with that sort of situation a bit better.
Well, that was him. That's why you know, opinions would be divided on him. And he said, hey, he'd 49 matches for England, and he was still promising at the end of it. Like, he never really got the job done, because when he was having a good time and he wasn't marked closely, then people who were watching the match say, you better get a grip on Glenn Hoddle. Then he'd be marked tightly, and then he wouldn't be as good. So that's why he was so mixed in opinions. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he did a huge job for Spurs at a time when they needed somebody like him to do it.
Was he a luxury player then?
Well, as I say, on his day, if he wasn't closely marked, he could be hugely influential with spectacular goals and spectacular passes, Nathan. You know, he could do it. He'd be better than what we hear today about a player on his day. I think he tried all the time. I think what you find with the players on their day today is they don't have a go. Now, to be fair to Hoddle, he always had a go, but he didn't have that change of pace that when he was closely marked to do what he could do when he wasn't closely marked.
So when you went up against...
He was a big hero, though. Big hero at Spurs, you know.
Well, I think they've always at Tottenham loved that type of player, that sort of flair player.
Oh, he could play. He could distribute a brilliant, lovely distributor of the ball, and could see that pass, Nathan. And again, it's all about time and space. If you're not given the time and space, then you can't produce it. And as I say, I don't think when he was closely marked, he wasn't quick enough to get away from the marker. But there was lots of days when he wasn't marked tightly, and he could really do his stuff. And he did his stuff at a time when Spurs, again, weren't a great team.
Yeah, he scored in the 79-80 season. He scored 22 goals that season from midfield, so he obviously had that in his locker as well.
Exactly. He was a brilliant... He could score some great goals, Nathan. You know, he was a very creative player and could see a pass and that. You know, very, very attractive player as well. But that would be my criticism of him at that time. But he's still getting in my Tottenham team over the years, because at a time that he did play, he did a lot of good for Spurs at that particular time.
So Danny Blanchflower and Glenn Hoddle are two of the three. Who makes up your Spurs midfield?
Dave Mackay.
No Luka Modric?
No, I have to apologise for John White, who played at that time, Ozzy Ardiles and Luka Modric. But Dave Mackay was the best of them all, Nathan. This was a guy who came down from Hearts in Scotland. I think it was in 1950, actually, but I played against him my first match as well. Dave Mackay was one of the greats. He could do everything. He could tackle. He could score goals. He could do it a lot. Dave Mackay was one of the greats. The great attitude, tackler. If he was playing in the left-hand side of midfield, but if the right winger or left winger was holding the ball long enough, he'd be tackling him. Did everything. One of the greats. This guy now would be better than Modric or John White or the players that we're talking about. He was the best, in my opinion. He was the best of them all.
a lot of what I would have read about Dave Mackay was probably later in his career when he signed for Derby under Brian Clough, and I think he was 33, 34 at this stage, and Clough turns him into a sweeper. And as you say, like, players as they get older should learn more about the game. He seemed to be exactly that when he went to Derby. Like, despite his age, was still this key figure in what Clough managed to do at Derby.
Oh, definitely. See, he broke his leg. He had a broken leg against Manchester United. He was in a tackle with Noel Cantwell when he was at his peak, and came back from that, Nathan. Now, he wasn't quite the same player again, but he did captain the team, I think, in 1967, I think, when they won the Cup, and went on from there. You know, this fellow was one of the greats. He was all over the place. He could tackle. He could win the ball. He was. I spoke to him at Billy Bremner's funeral. He came up for Billy's funeral, and he was a great player at Hearts. And Matt Busby was manager of the Scottish team for a while. And I said, why didn't Matt Busby sign you? Because he moved for Spurs for about 30 grand, which wasn't a great deal of money at the time. He said, I got a bad ankle injury. He said, and I played again, and I got it again. He said, I was out for a long time. And he said, I think everybody thought I was finished. And he then went to Spurs and was a sensation in his first season, Nathan. He was brilliant.
There's that famous photo of Dave Mackay and Billy Bremner when Mackay has a good grab of Bremner's jersey. I don't know, was Bremner out to get him in that match?
Well, Dave said that himself. I was at the match and I was near the tackle. I don't think he did. I'll tell you my own opinion on it. Dave Mackay was a great player, and this was after he broke his leg, and he didn't get back in the Scottish team, right? And Billy Bremner at that time was the captain of the Scottish team, and I think Dave resented it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I know Billy idolised Dave Mackay, idolised him. And I was near him. I don't think it was that bad a tackle. There was a bit of a contact, but Billy didn't go out to do him at all. But I think Dave, there was a famous photo, grabbed him. But I think Dave was thought, you little so-and-so, you're captain of the Scottish team, and I'm not captain of the Scottish team.
Yeah. And
you know what I mean?
I guess he'd had his
like
leg
he'd be
broken.
An upstart. Billy would be an upstart to Dave. Now, that's only my opinion on it, because I don't think that I was near the tackle. It wasn't that bad. But I think he'd think, you're captain of the Scottish team. Because Dave was an aggressive guy, you know. And here am I, and I'm not. I never have been captain of the Scottish team. I think it was a pride thing with him. But Billy idolised him.
Let's move on to the front three, as we're starting to get a little bit tight on time. So Danny Blanchflower, Dave Mackay, Glenn Hoddle are the midfield. Your front three, who's first on the list? I'm
going for Jimmy Greaves.
I don't think there's any surprise there.
The great Jimmy Greaves. Yeah, I'm going for Harry Kane.
Okay.
I think he's up with him. And I'm going with a lad called Cliff Jones, who was the left winger in that great Tottenham team years ago. He was a Scottish outside left, brave, brilliant goal scorer. And absolutely terrific player, Nathan.
Yeah, when you mentioned Cliff Jones earlier, I didn't know anything about Cliff Jones, but as you say, like more of a left winger, yet 135 goals in 320 appearances.
Yeah, exactly.
We've a bit of a John. We just have a bit of a problem with your phone line there. So what we might do is I'll just run you through the team that John has picked. So his 11, if there's any Tottenham fans out there, you can get in touch on 53106 here on the Football Show, or do send us a tweet at Off The Ball. We'll have this up online on offtheball.com very shortly. Pat Jennings in goals, a back four of Steve Perryman, Mike England, Ledley King and Chris Hughton, a midfield three of Danny Blanchflower, Dave Mackay and Glenn Whelan, and as John has just told us, his front three of Harry Kane, Jimmy Greaves and Cliff Jones, and he had lots of honourable mentions for various different players, including Luka Modric, who I'm sure would get in his Real Madrid all-time 11, but didn't make this. The likes of Gareth Bale, Clive Allen, Gary Lineker on that list of players who were very close to making his Tottenham all-time 11. I know there was a lot of controversy about Manchester United and Liverpool. I'm sure we're going to get plenty of reaction to this as well. John is back on the line. John, we were just talking about Cliff Jones, and it was mentioned that I'd heard very little about him, but a quick look up online showed he had this brilliant goal-scoring record for somebody who it seems essentially was a wide player.
Oh, a totally wide player, all the time wide, really real winger. Not very big either, quick, brilliant in the air, scored a lot of goals. He was a great player, Nathan.
Was he a tricky winger, or was it all about getting into the box?
Mostly pace.
Okay.
You know, he could go past him. You know, he didn't. But it was mostly great pace. Very courageous. In those days, you know, wingers weren't supposed to be courageous guys. But this fellow was courageous. Scored a lot of goals. With his header. Now, one of the greats, in my opinion, Nathan.
I'm not surprised to see Jimmy Greaves there. We've spoken about him a lot over the last few years, and obviously news in the last couple of days that unfortunately he's unwell again in hospital. So we hope that he can pull through that. But I think you said genius. Every time his name comes up, it's the first word that comes to your mouth.
Oh, genius! Best goal scorer. One of the best ever. Certainly the best in his day, Nathan. So that's my team. So obviously, the people mentioned Paul Gascoigne, who was a terrific player in my opinion. Nathan,
was that close for Gascoigne? Well, like when you're including somebody like Glenn Hoddle and Gascoigne, similar flair player, would he have been close to that 11? No,
I'll tell you why. He had all the ability in the world, Nathan, but he didn't handle himself. He was a wild boy, very very gifted, but really, I mean, with the gift that he had, he should have been one of the real greats, and he wasn't. You know, he got a bad injury at one time. He lost a head in a cup final. He was a wild lad, but terrifically talented. But I wouldn't have him ahead of, you know, John White was another player, Aussie our dealers. I'm sorry, Luka Modric. Like it was that picking the Real Madrid hit, Modric would be in it. But these were the great players. Gary Lineker deserves a mention. A lot of players deserve a mention. I don't have time to mention them, but Paul Gascoigne was a terrifically gifted lad. But I don't think ever made the best of the ability that he had.
Yeah, it is one of the great what ifs. If Gascoigne, as you say, maybe hadn't lost the head completely in that final because the tackle that he put in, that ultimately he suffered the injury in that cup final. Like his head seemed to be gone completely. Got a bad knee. If he hadn't had that knee injury, all the other problems, and he clearly has had massive issues throughout his life, but were all of those really exasperated because of the timing of that injury, where it looked as though he was about to become maybe one of the best players in the world? Like, do you think you'd seen enough that if he hadn't had that injury and if things hadn't gone wrong off the pitch, that he could have been one of the best players in the world?
Nathan, you can talk about the injury, but players get over injuries, right? Like, it was a self-inflicted injury, by the way, because his head was gone in the match. But when you get an injury like that, then you have to work hard to get fit, you know. But I know during that particular time he was up in Scotland at some time and out of his head with a few jars on him and fell down the stairs. You know, which put the injury back again. In other words, when you're a professional footballer and you get an injury, you have to work hard and hard and hard to get back your fitness. He was never the same after that injury, Nathan, because he didn't work at it as well. No, I don't want to be too cruel to him, but we're talking about as a footballer.
Yeah, look, I think there's a real sadness around Paul Gascoigne and the way things it turned out.
Definitely, had the ability, but didn't have the temperament to really be true to the gift that he was given.
Just to round off then, your final selection in the front three was Harry Kane, who may go on to break lots of records, and depending on how the next 5-6 seasons go with Tottenham, could end up as the all-time leading scorer in the Premier League and could lead Tottenham. He brought them to a Champions League final last week. Clive Allen, Gary Lineker, maybe a couple of those who were in the mix, or is Kane a level above them?
Oh, definitely. I think Harry Kane would, any of the teams I've mentioned over the years, whether the double team, I think Harry Kane would have got into any of those teams.
Okay.
And that's I think he has done an awful lot so far, and I think if he keeps his fitness, I think he's got the right attitude to be one of the greats at Tottenham. So he'd definitely be in my team.
All right, your team is Pat Jennings in goal, back four of Steve Perryman, Mike England, Ledley King and Chris Hughton. In midfield, it's Danny Blanchflower, Dave Mackay and Glenn Hoddle, and then a front three of Cliff Jones, Jimmy Greaves and Harry Kane. John, great stuff as always. We'll talk to you next Thursday.
Thanks, Nathan.